I'm very happy to introduce Tamsin Woolley-Barker for this talk. And let me begin, though, by saying a little bit about the series. This is actually the first talk in a weekly series, Pro-Social World Seminar Series. We had a couple of talks running up to it, one by Peter Gray, and then another by Elizabeth Castillo, who is right here. But from now on, it's going to be every week, alternating between noon and 6 p.m. with our cafes during the in-between week. And the whole roster will be up soon. And just let me introduce next week's speaker will be Jeremy Lent. He is the author of The Patterning Instinct and The Web of Meaning. And his most recent book that he's working on is Towards an Ecological Civilization. And so Jeremy is a very big thinker, and so it's going to be great to have him. And he's also built up his own community, much like the Pro-Social Commons. And so it's going to be very interesting to compare our communities. And he was inspired by Joe Brewer, our mutual friend, Joe Brewer. So these are communities that are developing in parallel. And Tamsin, I think that you count among them as someone who's building up your community, all driving towards the same goal, all informed by evolution, but many differences in their details. And what would this be but the variation in selection process? As long as we compare our methods with each other, then we could really be evolving together. So that is so that's really great. So with that, Tamsin, you are trained as an evolutionary biologist, and you did very distinguished research on the ecological genetics of baboons, if I'm correct. Is that right? Maybe you'll be telling us a little bit about that.
I will.
And then you have have a very diverse career, and I'll leave it to you to explain that to us. So why don't you take it away? Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, David. All right, I got a juicy slide deck here. Let's see if I can make it play. All right, start with this guy. Well, it's super exciting for me to be here because this is like my roots, my evolutionary biology roots. And I do consider myself still an evolutionary biologist at heart, although I've gone many different strange paths. So this is going to be fun to share this. So I'm going to be talking about living design, and it's a new approach that is very holistic and includes my evolutionary biology background as well as later strange paths that my work has taken. So I'm going to bring it all together, and I'll invite you to join wherever you like. So I'm going to go into why, how, and what. So why am I doing this? How am I doing this? And what the hell am I doing? So I'm going to share all that with you, and hopefully it gives you some context for how I got to where I got and where I'm trying to go. So I got the start, this is my earliest beginnings. I learned to read way too young. And so I was obsessed with language and story and nursery stories, early stories, myths, and that kind of thing. And I was really, we had an OED, Old English Dictionary, and it was unabridged. It was huge. And so this was like my prized possession of going through this thing, looking at the words and the flow and the mutation in the words and where they came from and thinking about that. So I think I was an evolutionary biologist from the very beginning because of that. And we're going to come back to it. But I really got on this track from, of course, Jane Goodall. Everybody loves Jane. And what stood out to me, I was reading this. I was reading In the Shadow of Man, and I was really young. But what stood out to me was that the way that she went into their world, she was humble and she earned their trust and went into their world, and they accepted her and allowed her to belong. And it wasn't like going to the zoo or, because I did a lot of drawing at the zoo and people would bang on the glass and that kind of thing. So I saw the real contrast there. And I really wanted that because we were migrants We came from England. So we didn't have a community around us. And I just really envied that you could go into a strange world, a strange worldview and belong. And she earned that through quiet consideration, observation, and humility. So like I say, I was really into drawing, and I was super into this drawing on the right side of the brain. So what I love about it is that you're looking at things in a fresh way. So she was showing us how to draw things upside down, and that would allow you to look more clearly, to see things as they are instead of as you think they are. So instead of drawing a man in a chair, you would draw what you see. And that was very foundational to me. And I did my first science project I did on this. And then going back to Jane, I grew up in San Diego in the tide pools. I was outside all the time. I was a naturalist. And so I had that real contrast between the zoo and my science and my naturalism, being outdoors, really participating as a member of these ecosystems. And then my dad was an architect. So he would take me out in the desert to show me these geodesic domes. And we talked a lot about, Frank Lloyd Wright and Buckminster Fuller, but the way that you could architect systems that would facilitate connections and different patterns of behavior. So rather than imposing what you think should be, you could facilitate it in an emergent way. So we talked a lot about that, and I was very into that. And I think that's really influenced what I do now. And I sort of think of myself as a social architect. And then, I was 18 and I discovered, you'll love this, David, Ayn Rand and Dawkins. And I was just, this is brilliant. But the funny thing is that they had told us, you should join a club at school, because then you get it on your CV, and then a great college will want you. But I didn't like groups. So I thought, well, God, if I start a club, maybe nobody will come. So I picked the Ayn Rand Club is what I started. And, and lo and behold, nobody showed up. So I had that all to myself. But I was really into that. And I was just loved Richard Dawkins, the idea of the self-emerging kind of accidental nature of the universe. And I had this image of Rainmaker, those sticks that you could pour upside down and the seeds rattle through it. And so I had this idea of beings falling through the holes that they fit through, and these kind of self-emerging, self-organizing, complex things emerging over vast quantities of time. And I just thought that was miraculous, like far beyond gods or anything like that. I just thought that was just incredible. That why don't we all fall down dead? It's just blows my mind. So I went to Santa Cruz to study plants and botany, because I felt that it was so hard to, plants don't have cute eyes. They don't, except for potatoes. They don't, so they don't manipulate you with emotions and all that stuff. So you can really get objective. I was really into that. So plants it was, and I studied these redwoods, and then I went to Kauai in the Hawaiian Islands, and I had Ed Wilson's book, and MacArthur Island Biogeography with me. And that thing was tattered. I was just falling in love with the plants and the place. And so it wasn't just this idea of that every being in these islands was a stranger to them. They were all invaders, and they all washed to these shores, and they became naturalized. They became they started belonging to the place. And how did they do that? It was in the relationships between species and the way they adapted to the place. And so that was, very inspiring to me. And the other thing is plant morphology, just the way that these plants were shaped to fit into their different environments. And that was magical to me as well. And I think all these things are critical to my work now. So I decided that, having done plants, I was ready to move on to the big guns, things with brains. So I was really into cognitive evolution, and I ended up on a fishing boat, like a deadliest catch boat in the Bering Sea. And it was 25 guys and me at sea. quite an adventure. Got lots of stories about that. But I was really there to watch whales. So I was watching these orca whales and studying their societies and just geeking out on that front. And then I went to NYU in Columbia. I was studying with Ralph Holloway, Columbia. And he was, at the forefront of cognitive evolution and looking at brains and how the human brain evolved and this kind of thing. But after a while there, I decided that that's not really where the magic was. It wasn't our big brains that made us what we were. I decided it was our societies. It was our structure and our interactions with each other that made humans what we are. So I moved down to NYU, all of 80 blocks, and studied with Cliff Jolly at NYU. And you might know him. He's this was a very well-known hybrid zone. So it was about 25 miles across, and there were 9 troops and they flowed across this hybrid zone. And so you could do experiments. I mean, it was a natural experiment. Each of these troops and each of these individuals was a different combination of genes, and they were interacting with different behaviors, and they of course had different social structures. So these 2 kinds of subspecies, or whatever you want to call them, populations, were very different from one another. So the Hamadryas baboon that you see here on the left live in these real almost regimented multi-level societies, where you've got these one male groups that might be a male and some females and her offspring. And then there's another male that follows up in the rear, and he's his nephew. So these clans form from these one male units, and from these clans, bands form, and from those bands, troops form. So this is very multi-level society. And it's very distinct and collaborative, and it's amazing at the kind of regimented behaviors that they have. And it looks very much like human societies. And that's in contrast to the Anubis baboons on the right, which have just kind of a loosey-goosey matrilineal, everybody's kind of friendly and they kind of move together, but nobody's really, if you trap a baboon in an Anubis society, nobody cares unless it's a male's favorite mate. He might bark. Or if you trap an infant of a female, she'll bark and be upset. But if you trap any member of a Hamadryas society, the whole society goes nuts, because those are, they have a higher level of collaboration and cohesion. And then in the middle is the gelada baboon. And if you know about Dunbar's number, this is the geladas that he was working on. And so I did my master's with the gelada. I actually, this paper is in Wikipedia under primates as the documentation for introgression. So it's used as the model for hybrid introgression in Neanderthals and humans and that kind of thing. So it's all very, great stuff. Still there. We ended up genotyping 1,000 baboons over a 25-year period. It's remarkable. And that's quite an honor for me to have been part of that experiment. So then you go out into the world, right? I had my dissertation and I was ready to go out in the world. And so I did have a lot of job offers, but they were all on the East Coast, and my husband was a surfer. He didn't want to go anywhere there wasn't surf. So we went to San Diego, and I ended up getting a job in biotech, corporate America. And my vice president was Monsanto, who was formerly a vice president of Monsanto. So I was deep in the belly of the beast. And so what I found was I got to compare the way that companies operate with the way the baboons operated. And truly, it really wasn't all that different in many ways. But so what you see, this scale up, and always talking about this scale up. Can we find the right number and scale it up to that? Can we, you know, we find that number and we predict and control. That's the model that we're using. But whose predictions, whose assumptions, whose perspectives are we using? I mean, it's the owner of the company, but it's the shareholders, and you know, and then you get into a lot of best practices that are actually just assumptions that we make. And what do you get? You know, you get, it's very expensive to fix problems in this way. You end up with the, you know, the Netherlands with the, you know, dikes and crumbling dikes and the boy putting his finger in them to try to hold it together. It's all falling apart. And what do you get? You know, people become disengaged. They lose their creativity and curiosity. They're just waiting for instructions, be told what to do. So it really wasn't my my cup of tea. You know, and then what do? They say, oh, well, okay, we're going to do total transformation. We're going to restructure. We're going to do incentives and, you know, maybe some threats. And then you say, gosh, if only people knew better, if only we could educate them to know better, they would do better. And I think as scientists, we fall into this all the time, you know, more data, if we could just educate people, but it's really a worldview. Right? So it doesn't produce the results that we want. So I just, you know, went and did my art and surfed and had my native garden and all those things that I loved and raised my family. And that was just fine. But, you know, life happens. And so we had a daughter, son and daughter, and my daughter one day just didn't wake up. She just passed away. You know, and that was really hard. It was set a domino effect in motion that, you know, destroyed our family, our business, everything. And so I was left holding the bag on a lot of baggage. And I had 3 children at that point. All of them had were on the spectrum, and you know, no business, no nothing. So, but I went back to my roots. You know, what do I know about evolution? Like, I just know about adapting to change. I know about resilience. I know about these things. So I, you know, just really put my mind to it. And there's the desert, the way things flow, life. And so I really hit a wall. You know, what was I going to do? And so I did a meditation. I mean, I just didn't know what else to do. So I did a meditation and it came to me. This abundance of sunlight flowing in and this infinite value coming from the sun, and that all the life on earth had come from this, and that everybody was helping each other. Here's these mycelial networks underground that help the trees come onto land. And now every, you know, 95% of the plants on earth depend on this relationship. And all of us depend on that relationship. It created the oxygen we breathe, on the soil, and on, everything we eat. And so I was just struck with this miraculous sensation. And also I was struck with our shared humanity. You know, the women that I worked with in Ethiopia in my field work, you know, many of them had 10 children and lost half of them. So I just had this feeling of solidarity and humanity and deeply shared humanity. And that gave me the strength to do this work. So I was thinking, you know, going back to my biotech and the difference between that and my field work, how efficiency stripped out all the potential in these systems. And that really what we needed was this diversity and this self-organizing abundance that life already contained within it. And so I thought harder on that, and I realized that all these best practices were actually imposed on our ancestors to extract their community wealth. The communities that we lived in and everything we had have now been replaced with these efficiency best practices that, you know, eradicate our communities and what makes us unique and our special potential. And this potential is really within us still. So it became my mission to rehumanize life and work using evolutionary principles. And the first thing, I mean, if you do a quick search online for STEM logos, and this is arguably, this is our solution space, right? We're educating children in STEM so that they can solve the world's problems. But if you look at these pictures, what's missing from them? Life is not in any of them. There's nothing alive. So how are we going to solve the world's problems if we're biological, we're animals, and life is not even considered in the solution space? That was really striking to me. But I do know how does nature adapt to change. So boldly I plunged onward. And I started writing this blog. It was called Bio-Inspired Inc. And it was just about my observations on how we could rehumanize life and work by using evolutionary principles. And that was picked up by this biomimicry manual, is the In Habitat magazine, digital magazine. And it had 3.5 million viewers. So I was able to do a Kickstarter for that, for a book, and that became Teaming, and which became a bestseller in a really wide range of categories. I mean, from ecology and animal behavior to organizational design and economics. So pretty wild. And that brought a lot of companies to me, and businesses were interested in this. And then along the way, I discovered biomimicry, that this was a field that existed. So I fell right into that and started working with Janine and the Biomimicry Institute and Biomimicry 3.8. So this idea of biomimicry, if you're not familiar with it, is that all living things evolved and survived over 3.8 billion years. So only the survivors have made it. And so they're all proven winners. We can, look at these patterns that are proven. And each of them is specific and unique, but you can generalize patterns. You can see patterns and you can see what works. And this is, not just theory. This is deeply useful to us. I mean, you think about, here's the problems with climate change and carbon, and the corals have been doing it all along. The trees have been doing it all along. We have this knowledge. We know how to do this. Life knows how to do it. So it's really looking at it in a more generalized way. So I did write this book. It was crazy that I wrote it, 5-minute increments on my passenger seat on an iPad while I waited for children at doctor's appointments. And but I got it done. And the essence of it was that, we're not just fancy apes. We're not just brilliant chimpanzees. There's something fundamentally different about us. We share 98% of their DNA, but what is that other 2%? And I can't really speak to what that is. It's complex, all these things. But what I did take away from my baboon work is that we're fundamentally organized in a different way. It's our social structure that made the difference. And I saw that we're organized more like superorganisms, more like ants and bees and these kind of colonial species. And so I started looking for the deep patterns that they share to hold them up as a comparison to our lives and work, to see where we might have deficits and where there might be hidden potential that we could access in redesigning our life and work. So this is a terrible definition, but it's one I use with companies. I'll say that I went into great depth with this. I was looking for these patterns, and this isn't something we do typically in science. Let's see. We're not typically looking for these deep patterns. We're not looking to overgeneralize these things. We're looking for the specifics and the data and the metrics. And I went beyond that. I went for the deep patterns. So I was looking at slime molds and mycelial networks, ants, bees, termites, social wasps, naked mole rats, and even, elephants and crows and cetaceans have some of those patterns. And so really looking for those deep patterns, something that we could generalize and then hold that up for hidden potential. So I say here that superorganisms are independently perceptive and creative individuals that fundamentally depend on one another. And of course, there's much more to it, because these are, they're also characterized by other individuals taking care of the offspring that aren't necessarily related, and multi-generational transfer of knowledge and these kinds of things. But here's some of the things that I noticed about humans that, that satisfied that criteria for me, is that 75% of our food in foraging societies is acquired by someone outside their immediate family. That's weird. I mean, most species are not doing that kind of thing. And that babies understand fairness instinctively. If you show a plate of cookies to a baby and then you split them unequally for two older children, the baby looks at you like you're out of your mind. Like, what are you doing? They know this. And that's from Tomasello's work. But you really can see that, even though chimpanzees understand fairness, they really don't care unless they're going to get beat up for it. But we have an intrinsic kind of moral sense about it. To the point where we've really weeded out the most dominant individuals. We don't want to mate with them if we can avoid it. And so people are generally, as a rule, pretty nice. And then the real kicker to me was that other great ape mamas do all their own childcare, but we share over half of our childcare on average globally. And not just with relatives, but with an extended network of others. And to such a point where our grandmothers are fundamental to our success. Grandmothers are, we have menopause in our species and this extended post-reproductive life. And that could only evolve if there was a direct benefit to us. So just to let you know, like, I've done a lot of research on this. I combed a lot of original literature looking for these deep patterns. And you can take me to task all you like, but I recommend you read the book. I'll leave that for a sec, because I really, it was very diverse bunch of literature that I went through. And I even got into the organizational work in human companies. As opposed to ant companies. And some of these books are really interesting, like this Rafe Sagarin at the end, Learning from the Octopus, and Stanley McChrystal, General Stanley McChrystal, Team of Teams. A lot of the literature is actually from the cybersecurity and that kind of thing. So, and we'll get more into that, the parasites. Okay, so these deep patterns, diverse individuals are self-organizing. They work in these loose, small, modular, autonomous teams that specialize in different work. And they share a purpose or identity, and they share a set of stigmergic rules. Like, those are like if-then rules, very simple. But by sharing them, these complex, highly effective processes emerge. So they don't tell each other what to do. The queen is not telling them what to do. She's a regulator, and she also produces the pheromone that unites the colony, and other individuals are spreading that throughout the colony. And that's like their shared purpose, because really what they're sharing is their reproductive future. Because the queen is doing all the reproduction for everyone, but everyone has different jobs that support her in that, and everyone does better as a result. So they're not having meetings or org charts or targets or salaries or promotions or, God forbid, annual reviews, none of that stuff. They just simply forage for work, and they make small imperfect decisions, and they're constantly course correcting, and they rely on their diversity, variation, and redundancy for their health and their continued function, flexibility, no matter what happens. So I thought, what if organizations were more like slime molds? They could do all these things. And so this was very attractive to companies like Cisco that were doing, Cisco's got 70,000 employees, and everyone's got different projects they're on, and they have a lot of latent knowledge within their networks that they don't know they have. They know they have it, they don't know what it is. So this was very appealing to them, and I did a lot of work with companies like Cisco as a result. So here's the kind of very broad pattern that I distilled. So many diverse individuals are gathering value. They're upcycling it through symbiotic relationships. And these symbionts are breaking that value down and returning it to the territory. And the territory grows richer. And so it's worth defending. And this all maps onto pro-social, bounded commons and protecting them. So, this occurs throughout a very diverse arrangement of species. So you can even think, so ants are doing this, we can understand that. Like the leaf cutters are gathering these leaves, these scraps of leaves, and they're bringing it to their fungal gardens that are, upcycling that. They're breaking that down and digesting it and making it into a product that the ants can use. So the ants are actually eating the fungal fruits. And that's similar with termites, or doing something similar to that. The bees are out gathering specks of pollen and bringing it to one central location. And they're upcycling it with bacteria and other organisms. And then like the mycelium even, or slime mold. We can't really say eyes and minds, but these are diverse individuals, genetically diverse. So they don't share a reproductive future 100% necessarily, but they do share a network, and they share their cell walls. They're gathering specks of nutrients and water in the environment, and they're bringing it together and they're feeding it to their symbionts. They're supporting the trees. And then other organisms are coming and breaking that down, and that keeps it in the territory. So you've got all kinds of organisms coming for honey, or coming, aardvarks, things like that. But the territory does grow richer. And of course, hornets and ants, they can be very fierce about that. So here, these are these Namibian termite mounds and macrotermites in Botswana and Namibia. And some of these can be like 30 feet tall. It's pretty remarkable. But really that structure above ground is just their air conditioner. The actual colony is way deep down in there, safe. But what's happening is that at night, these little termites go out and gather these scraps of, dried grass and bark and things that are really not much value to other species, other creatures. It's hard for them to collect, and it's hard for them to get the value. So these termites are going out, they're collecting all this, they're bringing it to their fungal gardens, which fungus can digest the cellulose and lignin and fiber, which most animals cannot do. So they're digesting that, and in the process, the grass is getting richer. That's drawing herbivores. The herbivores are contributing droppings. It's attracting carnivores. The carnivores are leaving carcasses. That's enriching the soil. And these territories get richer and richer. And they have other benefits as well. They're the water, if there's rains, that water goes deep into the earth. And these are just a fundamental architectural important keystone species in the environment. So that's the general pattern. And now I've drawn it out like this. This is how I conceive of it. So it's a process, right? So they've got this shared community identity, and they are individuals, as teams, they're going out and gathering these wild resources, these little particles. This swarm creativity is these teams that are specializing in different things. That requires this collective intelligence, that individuals are diverse and self-organizing, they have agency, and they're communicating. And then with this, they are actually taking care of these symbionts. And you can see that these taking care of them actually replenishes the wild resources. So their nutrients require this kind of cycle. And this is like a vast overgeneralization, but it's a pattern, a deep pattern that we can use and hold up to our own life and work and see where it deviates. And that can give us ideas about hidden potential and deficits. So I refer to this as teaming. This whole pattern and process is teaming. So these are 5 teaming patterns, and I can use these with companies and communities, organizations of all kinds, to reveal ideas for them of how they can gain additional value. So here's kind of to ground it a little bit, Pax Scientific. This is Jay Harmon is an Australian surfer. And what he noticed is that there were waves and shells and this kind of spiraling pattern. So he saw that energy didn't actually move in a straight line from point A to point B. It actually spiraled. And so he thought that was very interesting, deep pattern. And he actually froze a whirlpool and turned it into a fan or an impeller, which then became fans and all kinds of mixers. And they turn out to be 85% quieter and more effective and more efficient. And so now fans, like your computer has fans. Fans are everywhere. That hum that you hear in the background all the time is getting revolutionized by this. So imagine this 85% increase in efficiency and potential that we can gain. And this is just from a product, but this is true across the board in our organizations. Everything we do is that we're imposing models that are not accurate on the reality. And even Jay took it to governments and military, and nobody would bite because their engineers just said, no, energy travels in a straight line from point A to point B, but he could observe this deep pattern. And so now we're doing that. So I talk about this potential energy of where things would go if we allowed them to move freely. And we're just leaving this value on the table all the time. So I work with a lot of companies, helping them surf for free on the potential that's already in motion that we're leaving on the table. And it's pretty astonishing. We have this idea that we're so efficient, and we are, but because conditions are always changing and because organisms are always investing in each other, we leave all that on the table, and we're reaping the results of that. So here's another example. Those termites, they use 0 fossil fuels to keep these structures within a single degree Celsius, which in the desert, these are like radical temperature changes going on. And they do it all passively. They are, modifying the earth in little ways, but they don't require any additional input to do it. And contrast that to us using 20% of the world's fossil fuels on our own structures. So this gives you an idea of the potential we're leaving on the table all the time. And here again, people are spending 70 million hours in traffic in the Netherlands last year, whereas the leafcutters spend 0 hours stopped in traffic. But you can see that we're engaged in the same kinds of intelligent design. This kind of complex structures can look very similar in other superorganisms. So a lot of what I do with companies, I talk about the evolutionary potential that they're leaving on the table. And where does it come from? Well, in the wild, it is the diversity, the exchange between these diverse individuals and species, and that's yielding new opportunities. So I do a lot of work with them on this. And fundamentally, a lot of companies, because they're in this efficiency mindset, they're trying to eliminate deviation from standard. They're trying to eliminate the diversity or control it. But that is actually the limiting factor on the rate of change. Ronald Fisher, 1930. So we know that. And how do you increase diversity? It's through exchange. And how do you do that? Well, you have to increase the complementarity and the capability and the reliability of your partners, the reciprocity. Like the fungus underground and the trees, they've become tuned to each other in that way. And as we do that, the opportunity space increases. And now after 3.8 billion years of evolution, we have 30 million species maybe. And all of those have their own niches, and those are, expanding the opportunity space. So I encourage companies and organizations to think this way, which is often very radical for them. I'm just going to breeze through this just to give you an idea of the kind of work that we do. I do a lot of different kinds of work where I'm bringing different evolutionary models in and taking them through this to look for these kinds of opportunities. So here, when you're looking at an ecosystem, it's made of patches that are in different states of succession. We talk about the adaptive cycle and how when you saw those, those redwood trees in Santa Cruz, that there's nothing can get a start under there. So you've got locked up resources. So you're graduating from college, there's nowhere to get a start. And it's disturbance that's creating these opportunities. And that might be wildfire, that might be a tree falling in the woods, these kinds of things. And then when that happens, those little opportunists, those weedy, quick moving things come in and they invest very little, but they move fast. But that they start to partner with each other and grow that opportunity space. And that paves the way for longer term investors. So a company like Cisco that's doing so many different kinds of things can start looking at it as an ecosystem. Or in a community, all the different entrepreneurs can start looking at themselves as an ecosystem. And they can start playing together and investing in one another to keep this, healthy patch kind of dynamics alive. So that's something to be thinking of. And I just, provoke them with these kinds of questions. And they find it very rich. So other species are investing in their partners, and the same could be true for us. And then we feed what feeds you, like the superorganisms, or by feeding their symbionts, it replenishes the raw resources that they require. So like we said with the termites, they're enriching the soil, and that's increasing the grasses that they depend on. And that's where we're falling down. So this coevolution is critical. And so why is that? Why are we falling down? And so this is another deep pattern that came out of my research, is that superorganisms are plagued by parasites because of their abundant, concentrated wealth. They're commons. And so they draw parasites. They're attracting free riders all the time. And we know that cheater strategies are successful until the hosts get wise, and that choosing good partners is essential. So how do parasites work? Well, typically in these superorganisms, they use deception to get in. So they will actually mimic the host scent or behavior. And so perhaps you might find a spider that produces the scent of the larva, the ant's larva. And so when an ant comes along and finds this spider, it goes, oh, there's a larva that should be in the nursery. And they'll pick it up and take it down to the nursery where it eats all the young. And that's a deep pattern. And then there's even slaving species that will maybe steal the larvae once they get in, or even worse, they will sterilize the queen, and her workers will now take care of the new queen, the parasitic queen. And so the whole colony is taking care of someone else's future. And that's a little bit like our work that we do much of the time. And I just find this interesting that slaving species are generally the sister taxa of their hosts. They're their closest living relatives because they speak the language. And these are all fancy ways of saying, Fox News, look out. So we go back to this kind of framework to think about this. So here comes the parasite coming into this healthy superorganism system. And what does it do? It takes over the swarm creativity. It takes over individuality. It wants host labor, and it wants it to work efficiently, to efficiently bring those resources to the parasite and feed it. That's it. So it doesn't care about the symbionts. It doesn't care about the collective intelligence, and it certainly doesn't care about shared identity. So you can see that these patterns collapse. And to me, this looks a little frighteningly real in our lives. And I think it's interesting when you get this, when you take out the symbiotic upcycling, you start accumulating waste as well. And that poisons the host. And then we see the parasite just leaves to another planet or wherever they're going, colony. So this is all interesting too, and I have clients that have come to me for all these different topics. And the that last one, I actually worked with an organization that I can't mention, but rhymes with CIA. But these guys, they had 5 guys in the back. They were just astonishingly nondescript. Like I could, like you couldn't get more nondescript. All sat in the back and watched this about parasites because they were working on cybersecurity. So these have real world applications. All of these, I mean, I've worked with a lot of companies, and most I can't name because I'm under NDA, but this will give you an idea of how who's using it and how. So a lot of these companies came to me because they wanted to increase equity or equitable sharing in the company. They had problems with gender politics or different things like that. So I'll go more into that. And then others were looking more for those operations of, how do we increase collective intelligence, and how do we unleash the latent potential that we have in our workforce? Some of these were biomimicry projects where, like with Dassault, Dassault Systems, this was actually turned into a $50 million contract of, we created an enterprise level solution using quantum physics to model the materials of the future. IDEO came to me for designing work that works for women using these methods. Many things. Any interesting? Oh yeah. Oh, there's just such good things in all of these. And so going back to that pattern, so I'm thinking about how am I going to rehumanize life and work with these patterns? And of course, this is Donella Meadows, the interventions in a system. And it's the structures and processes that we live and work in, as we saw with those baboons, the social structure. But more fundamentally than that, what we're really getting at is a paradigm shift. And I knew this, but I decided that I could not go in and convince people to change their minds and their worldview. But what I could do is help companies change their structures and processes so that they could adapt faster, be more resilient, be more agile, all the things that they were actually looking for, innovation and those things. So it was kind of a Trojan horse that I set up there. But now with the pandemic, I'm seeing more and more that people are saying, what else do you have? What else can we do? So I've seen a real sea change just in the last 2-4 years. So here these companies are really focused on the operations, the collective intelligence, the swarm creativity, just efficiently gathering these raw resources, these nutrients, and production efficiency. And so, these are some of the things that that we work on, that they want collective intelligence, but you have to grow trust. And how do you do that in places with biocultural renewal? How do you get collective intelligence? You need diversity and agency and communication. How do you increase opportunity? It's diversity and exchange and these patchy systems that we were talked about. How do you increase trust? It's the complementarity, reliability, and reciprocity. And how do you grow on the ground, with a mindset change? And it's these commons. It's pro-social. It's sovereignty and intimacy, intimacy with the land and with the other species in the land. And what I found is that we don't have the capacity for that. We don't have the structures, and we don't even have the ability to see. So it goes back to that drawing on the right side of the brain, learning to see again, learning to see these processes. So these, I figured, are all ways that I could actually get at that mindset change. And I grew up, Gandhi was big in our house, and I just felt like it was a violation to go in and try to change someone's mind or to convince them of something or to educate them in my way. I wanted to facilitate them coming to these realizations through their own lived experience and through their own eyes. I'm gonna skip that. So I'm just going to go through real quick a little bit of the stuff that I do with the companies so that you can get a little bit more of a handle on that. So with the swarm creativity there, these teams are foraging for work. And it's, because they're working in teams, it's the structure is the strategy. Nobody's telling them what to do. There's no rigid org chart. It's this self-organizing structure. So it's the structure itself is the strategy. And the team of teams, and these specialized roles. And I always share with them about the hierarchies because they're really used in nature, uses them to prevent change. It's when things go wrong. So that's a real mindset shift for them. And it's collective intelligence. How do we empower that? How do we grow that and protect that? It's really a commons, all the things that we need to achieve it. Shared purpose. These are things that, companies are thinking, if I want to avoid telling people what to do and the loss of engagement and creativity and flexibility and all these things, I have to double down on shared purpose. And how do I do that? What's shared purpose? Well, it's the things we care about, right? It's like our meaningful relationships, purposeful work, and freedom to do things the way that we see fit. Ants are all doing it their own way. They have different personalities and different ways of working. The classic story for collective intelligence is this honeybee democracy, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with it, but this is Thomas Seeley's work. And what he saw is that when the bees need a new home, they go out in different directions, these scouts, while the rest of the hive is waiting quietly. And so these scouts are going out and they're sampling other possible sites, and they come back with that information. And if they really like it, they'll do this waggle dance, this figure 8 waggle dance, which tells the other bees what direction it is, how far it is, and her vigor of dance tells them how much she likes it. And so what you get is these dance floors that are humming with different ideas, different sites. And it's an honest competition of ideas. And at some point, so if a bee sees another bee do that dance, she might go out and check it out for herself and come back. And if she likes it, she'll do the dance as well. So you get this amplification of dances for good sites and a decay of sites, of dances for sites that are less good. And at some point it hits a tipping point and the whole hive flies to the new site. And amazingly, 85% of the time they pick the right site, the best site. It was quite remarkable. And it's a way that, we could be using that too. It's not consensus. It's not committee. It's just this self-organizing kind of quorum sensing. And it relies on their independent thought and action. And it relies on their shared set of simple rules and these tipping point shifts that can really allow the colony to change on a dime. And it can allow us to do the same thing. It requires shared purpose, and it requires equitable sharing of work and wealth. And it requires diverse belonging, equitable sharing. And so how do you maintain that? And so what we see in the ants, for instance, is this distributed leadership where lots of individuals are responsible for maintaining it. And it's difficult for us to do because we're competing for different salaries where we have no sense of we, and if we're competing, like if you think about in foraging societies, they would wait for the kids to show their special talents and they would develop that in them, and then they would initiate them into shared rights and responsibilities. But we don't do that because there is no we. We're competing. We don't care about some other kid's potential. So we're leaving all this potential on the table, but we're also really violating our essential nature as superorganisms. We don't even have the psychological safety to operate in collective intelligence. And we, of course, have almost no structures for growing our commons and growing trust in those commons. And so we have a place-sourced cultural identity, you know, someone like me that migrated from England. And then so many of us, our ancestors had migration done to them, or, you know, that we've just lost our roots. We've become separated from that biocultural renewal of the stories and the songs that, and the plants and animals that we used to care for, those commons. And then in distributed leadership, you're seeing in the ants and the bees that, you know, that if they're working in these small modular teams, and lots of individuals are more active, more social, knitting together these teams into a larger fabric, spreading the social unity through pheromones, and that represents their shared purpose. And even like in bees, some bees, rogue bees, are, even though they're sterile, they're actually laying eggs that are fertile. And other bees come along and remove those. And that's, you know, they're not getting punished or anything like that. It's just this distributed correction that enables them to, you know, it protects their commons. And you see this in foraging peoples too. They're fiercely egalitarian. That's a, you know, a big statement, big general statement, but Eric Boehm's work, and I know he passed away last year, but I highly recommend that, reading that, and Franz Pfahl's work as well. So they do a lot of work to prevent upstarts, to prevent arrogance or bullies, even in the San bush people. Whoever owns the arrow that kills the, you know, the antelope is considered the owner of the meat, and it's his responsibility to distribute the meat, even though he wasn't even on the hunt, because they're swapping their arrows around all the time. So they use a lot of mechanisms like this to maintain equality and to prevent, you know, big man, big head. And so that's, I've actually started this bonobo revolution. A lot of the companies that came to me were struggling with gender inequity in their, like I took a Roche through their Eastern European and African divisions through the redwoods and taught them about these processes in the redwoods. And so, but the bonobos, though chimpanzees would, you know, alpha male, the whole thing, with the bonobos, who are also our equal relatives, they actually, if a female is threatened, she'll call her sisters and they'll shut that down. And so this is like, I talk about working in threes, and it distributes the accountability and these kind of mechanisms. And so getting away from fairness and going towards collective intelligence is that it's better for all of us. So this has been very effective. IDEO came to me with that. And so just to give you an idea, so this is my team lab work. So I've got all kinds of online courses and workshops and salons and events. And I really want to bring this to like business schools. I really want to spread this stuff in useful ways so companies can access it. And of course, they come in through the operational side. That's the new book that I'm writing now. And there's also a community, like a Patreon community, where I've been putting all the resources in there so people can use them. I'm very open source, and that way I want people to play. And so getting back then, you know, we've got this parasitized mindset. So how do we get to the paradigm shift? How do we go there? So like, you know, I was talking about everything is on this operational level, but really it's this symbiotic upcycling and the relationship between individuals, and that renewal is what cements the community identity. So we've really lost this whole process because we're not intimate with the land that feeds us anymore. So this has kind of become very exciting work for me because working with the Biomimicry Global Design Challenge, we were initially working on carbon sequestration and how does nature do that? And so I was invited to go to Panama to Geoversity and teach there. And they asked me to be the dean of their Geoversity School for Biocultural Renewal. So that was amazing. These indigenous climate activists doing work for, mostly climate, but all other things as well. And so we went across Panama, transcontinental journey, all human powered. It was truly wild, staying with villages and talking to the silas, the chiefs, about climate change and their experience of it, and learning about the biocultural renewal itself and how they do that intergenerationally, how it comes from the water and the stories and songs that they share. And it came to me, I really had a change in my thinking through this process, because I realized that they were scientists just as much as me, but they had a very different way of doing it. And then, of course, in Hawaii, the navigators have incredible pattern knowledge. So, and controlled burns in Australia and California, they do it very consciously. And we've talked about this and maintaining that disturbance, so the diversity of patches. This is how it happens. And people have done this for a very long time. Kat Anderson's book, Tending the Wild, that blew my mind when I found that, because I had never thought about it. I'd always assumed, I kind of had a chip on my shoulder, like I'll never see a Brontotherium because people are just inherently destructive. But it turns out that communities have, for many generations, thousands of generations, taken care of the land. And what we see is that land that has indigenous communities still on it has higher diversity of plants and animals. And so that was really an eye-opening to me. And so I got into this biocultural regeneration with the School for Biocultural Leadership. And that's, here you are, David. And I used that with the navigators. So what actually happened is they made a movie of this. So this is an Australian director, Celeste Gear, and the movie's called The Endangered Generation. This is coming to HBO, and it is playing at Sundance, I believe, next year. This is the trailer. I'll share it with you guys, but it's amazing. It's an 1.5-hour feature documentary. It's narrated by Laura Dern, and it's got all kinds of great people in it, very inspiring, but it's really about the hopeful approach of living design, how we can apply evolutionary biology and ecological thinking and indigenous land practices. How can we apply them for a more hopeful future? All the things we want to do, we have it within us because we all evolved and we all survived and our ancestors got us here. So I'm excited about that. So from this, living design has just taken off. So we start with this unification map where we're actually using this to map indigenous projects and flow resources to them, monetary resources, but also social networks and expertise. So any project that is like that is land sourced and using original wisdom, original land practices can be on this map. And so, I invite you to join us on that. Oh, whoa, what did I just do? Okay. We're doing regenerative tourism, and this is super exciting because this is allowing indigenous people to control and manage their own tourism so that people can come and travel, but learn the original practices, the original principles, and really connect to land. And then take these deep patterns back to their home and learn how to do that and regenerate land connection in that way. So we're doing this in Kauai with the elders, and we're doing this in Panama. And so now we're starting this network of Airbnbs and hip camps and things like that, where people can actually stay with families and actually practice these things. So that's been very exciting. We've got the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute involved in that as well. The Rehumanized Minds, a new book, because I really started focusing more on the paradigm shift. So how does art and nature and myth, all those things that got me started on this path, how do they help us change our minds? And how do they help us reconnect to land and those original practices, ancient practices? that will help us bring that land back and reconnect to it. So if the goal of life is to match your nature with nature, it's like, which nature, where? It's in your home, it's your community, it's your commons. And so this is kind of a summary of where I kind of got to, the things we need, and this slide will be, I'll share this with you, but this kind of is a summary of what I think is important here. The things that we need to cultivate. And so a lot of the work I'm doing now with communities through living design is on these things. How do we increase these? And a lot of the time it comes to getting kids and people out on the land and observing those deep patterns. So I do it through naturalism practice, teaching them to track, teaching them to see. We do art, plein air art, where they're actually drawing and quieting their cleverness and learning to just see. And then the myths and the living mythology, the stories, it helps them see from other perspectives in other ways. As we know that parasites are actually the primary driver of host evolution. So this sounds all very depressing, but to me it's exciting. Because who are the parasites? Well, they're us, they're among us, right? They're ideas. They're not people, they're ideas. And so, how can we change the alignment and the structures and processes that we're in to change the whole system, and that can change our paradigm and our mindset from the bottom up. And these are some of the ways that other superorganisms do that. I just think right off the bat, prevent parasitic entry, the way we have Facebook. Who are these people? I don't know. They're bots. That couldn't, it's not even a metaphor for parasitism. It's straightforward. And then, how can we reveal that through greater transparency and free press and jam parasitic tactics? A lot of companies and organizations have been interested in the pandemic, the quarantine, and how do other superorganisms do it? And there's very, clear, deep patterns on this. This is very rich for any kind of security work. Dunbar's number, that we work in these small networks and we have to maintain commons through that. And that includes the psychological safety and the equity. We just can't do it in this global, blown out, no structure system that we have. It's got to come down to place and structure and small communities in our commons. And that's going to require, that distributed leadership in place. And then this, you'll find this interesting, David. This is sort of my take on pro-social as I work with companies and specifically with indigenous communities. Because a lot of times they don't respond well to this kind of prescription. So they want to find their own way through it. And so this is one way I've found to do it, is that they can explore these kinds of principles and see how it relates specifically to the way that they want to do things. And what we find is that usually they fall right into it because they already have commons that they protect or that they're trying to protect. And so they get it right off the bat. It's actually very easy to work with them in that way. And so where I'm beginning to change the structures and processes so we can rehumanize life and work, it's really come back around to coming home to place in the way that, those species are coming to the Hawaiian Islands and naturalizing and belonging. And so I hope for that for all of us. So living design is the way I'm doing that. And it's a broad blanket. It includes a lot of things. Regenerative design from Regenesis Institute. I have a faculty member that I work with intimately on everything. The biocultural renewal, we do these nature of place immersions, which we did one for Google, where we're looking at that place and the deep stories, the deep patterns of that place, and helping, entrepreneurs, different companies, different organizations in that place double down on those patterns so that they can increase their unique potential in the world. They can increase their unique contribution. And through doing, they become more significant and they grow their opportunity space. That's been very exciting. Here is the most exciting thing to me. So when I came back from Panama, this was in February 2020, I was super excited to, go to town on this school for biocultural renewal and do immersions in the field and all of this. But then the pandemic came. I couldn't do that. And I was camping in the park in this Anza Borrega Desert Park in San Diego. I camped there every week. I loved it. And when the pandemic happened, they closed the park, which was crazy. I never thought that could happen. So I figured I had to acquire some land so that I could do immersions and do these kind of workshops that I wanted to do. And lo and behold, I found this crazy cool ranch that's 86 acres. It's wilderness. There's a herd of endangered peninsular bighorn sheep, mountain lions, bobcats galore. There is an ancient ironwood forest, and it was a Kumeyaay village for possibly 9,000 years. So there's tools, there's pottery shards, there's metates, even the herbs and medicinal plants are still there. And so it's amazing to bring people there and help them see these kind of deep patterns and start applying them in a deeper way to their own communities and lives and work. So that's the work we're doing there. I'd love to welcome you there. I mean, it's just so epic there. Just, you've got to come. So we can do camping there. We sleep 20 people. We're going to have all kinds of workshops. And if anybody out there wants to do a workshop or give one, and you're in alignment with these kind of values, I welcome that. We're going to have camping, Airbnbs, hip camps. And it's all around this nature of place. What are the deep patterns of place? And so we're doing it in Kauai with the elders. We're doing it here in San Diego with the tide pools. And we're doing it in Borrego with the Kumeyaay and that community there. So I invite anyone who's doing any kind of work like this to contact me, and we'll put you on the map and we can include you in our network. And we've got a regenerative founder circle around this now, where we're just, creating this kind of network. So, and that's forming right now. And I think we have a few more places in there. So it's really coming to seeing with fresh eyes again. That's my son. And growing our curiosity and consideration and compassion and creativity and care. And of course, critical thinking that we've so lost. And that's it. My email's down there. You're welcome to contact me. I love questions and I love to chat with you. And I'd love to see you out there. Okay.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Wow. That's it.
So, okay. Well, I'm so happy to have heard this and to have recorded it. So that's just part of our community. And we do have time for questions. So I think that if you use the digital hand, that will queue up. And please, let's have some questions. Such a feast of ideas. Kurt, you're first.
Yeah, really briefly, I was just going to say that Tamsin is really the lead speaker in a group from our Holistic Design and Biomimicry Circle and the Evolutionary Leaders for a program that'll be part of the Global Oneness Summit, which usually has a draw of about 500,000 people, runs from August 15 to 24, and that's all pre-recorded. They did a great job. So that's out there. And as well, a book that David's also contributing to, that's coming out in March on the global emergence of the holistic movement at a global level. She's actually writing or leading the chapter with a bunch of other people, but the lead author on the chapter on eco-governance. So that's exciting. And just very quickly, I want to say, it's interesting that over 40 years ago, and this is clear back when I was at, early on at the American Museum of Natural History, and certainly not a publisher like I am now and other things, but there was a young guy who was deeply into this spiral patterning, and he had written a brilliant, brilliant book about it. And unfortunately, no one was interested. We shopped it around, no one was interested. And he actually committed suicide because he was seeing so much deeper than anyone else. While we were on this program, I was just researching his family to see if I could get in touch with them and let them know that people realize now that this is so foundational. And luckily, I think I was able to find some contact information for them. So that's an amazing synchronicity, Tamsin, to over 40 years ago in my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kurt.
Great, thank you. Eric, you were super to be next.
Hi, Eric.
Hello there.
Hi.
Well, that was a fabulous rundown.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, it's so rich.
Oh, thank you.
You got to a point there where you said, I think I heard you right, that structure is the strategy.
Hmm.
Well, that just brought in a whole bunch of interesting connections for me.
Okay.
Because if structure is a strategy, the spiral is the structure
Yeah,
in the
that's
universe. And this structure incorporates the involutionary and the evolutionary process, depending on the oscillation direction of the wavefront. So if the spiral then is, how we like to analyze things, since the spiral is expanding or contracting depending on the wavefront direction, right? Well, you take a cross section of that, it becomes the cycle.
Mm.
And the cycle is repeating itself all the time. And through my work of charting all sorts of cycles for a long time, it's a device by which you understand the fractal nature within the expansion and contraction of all universal processes. And so you get the elevation shifts along the spiral path, and you just examine that. And when you then look at the cross section of the spiral that you relate to, right? Then because it's common within your world, and I like to work with the day spiral and the moon spiral, the month, and the solar spiral. Okay, those are three main ones, but then you go down from there and up from there. But by understanding that fractal nature and the energy shifts that are common and repeatable within that, then you can expand to the larger cycles that you don't have any intimate relationship to and understand they're doing the same thing. And I've had some very good success in applying that. So I was really fascinated by how you triggered that, like, new perspective. And so I might want to play with that a little bit.
Thanks. That is cool. Yeah, I mean, those are the kind of things I think about, and I haven't thought about it in as depth as you have. So I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I'll share some ideas over time here as we go forward.
Awesome. Thanks,
Yeah.
Eric. Anybody else? I know I've like.
Well, yes, let's see, for sure. Well, let me have a go here. So I've so much to think about, Tamsin, and I can't help but compare your basic approach with the basic approach of pro-social world. And they're both inspired by evolution and nature, but they're so very different from each other. And ours is, you could only say, a lot more sciencey, for better or for worse, a lot more sciencey. And I'm not saying that yours lacks that, and I think that a point that I often find myself making, and you made it yourself, is that, nature isn't just completely harmonious. There are such things as parasites and so on. And in fact, nature often is, like, illustrates the first noble truth of Buddhism: suffering caused by craving. And basically what you have is, you have species in nature that are operating at cross purposes to each other, and they are as dysfunctional as whole collectives as many dysfunctional human societies. And often I think when you look in real world situations, you find situations like that, where you find agents in a very complex system that are working at cross purposes with each other. And then the great challenge is to turn a harmonious system, turn that into a harmonious system. That's the great challenge. And in order to do that, there has to be a deliberative process of cultural evolution. And for that, we have to have a target of selection. We need to orient variation around the target. We need to replicate best practices. And it's more of a engineering project, or I mean, it involves all kind of monitoring and stuff like that. And so it ends up being a whole different sort of ethos to it. And I think that when I view what you're doing and admiring a lot of it, I find myself, I'm very strong on inspiration, on felt experience, on kind of a holism, and great ideas popping out all over the place of what one might do. But I wonder if it actually leads to some sort of orchestrated effort to evolve whole systems, which is what is kind of front and center for us. And so just speak to me on those themes, because I'd love to think that there's a hybrid possible. And I think certainly we could learn a lot from you. So just speak to me on I think you're probably familiar with the kind of thing that I'm pointing to.
Sure. I mean, you've got the advantage of these very controlled experiments. And of course, if we're going to make a case for this, we're going to need to have that. And so I think there is a fertile ground for, can we turn this into a replicable system? Can we turn these into, processes that we go into? And that's kind of what I've been doing. But I think I have because of that indigenous science, what I call naturalism, I don't even call it science, because we have this kind of, approach to looking through the microscope, and we're the objective viewer, and that's the subject. And so we bring, whatever we think is the right way to do it. And of course, we're all very educated and all that. But when I go into these, indigenous communities, they're allergic to that. They're allergic to the experts coming in, telling them how to do things. And so the approach has to be very different. It has to be, what are you trying to be? What is unique to you? What is your story? What is your identity? And so it has to be very different. And so I do believe there's a hybrid approach. And of course, here we have, climate, and biodiversity problems, 85% of the biodiversity is in land controlled by this 5% of the population, these indigenous populations. So really, they are the solution for a lot of these things. So how are we going to do that? And so that's really been my challenge, is how can I come in with what I know and help them be what they want to be, rather than, here I have these answers. Let me do this to you. So,
well, on that point, Tamsin, let me inject that I think that on that point in particular, that this needs to be done with, not done to, that we take that very seriously ourselves. And so I think that, and we might, we might not succeed, but we definitely, at least that's part of our own narrative, is that this is fully participatory. It must be done with, not done to. So, but
well,
that's just
it's inherent in the pro-social, right? Like sovereignty and
it's baked into the core design. Core design principle.
And so I guess part of my challenge has been, because I'm not in academics anymore, I'm not constrained by that, but also I'm having to make a living. So I'm going into companies, or I'm going into communities, and I have to play with them. I have to ask them, what are you trying to be? What are you trying to do? And so it's all driven by them, right? I can only facilitate. And so it's a different thing where I can't, and I would love to, and I've actually structured my work so that I could come in and do experiments of this kind. I love experiments. And so I hope to get to a point where we can do that kind of thing. So I think you're right on the hybrid.
Yeah, and I think, where I think I could learn a lot from you, speaking for myself, is just to make it more experiential. I mean,
Yeah.
you take people out in nature and so on. Of course, that involves working with people in real locations and so on and so forth, which is so important. I see Glenn and then Paul.
Oh, you're on mute, Glenn. Still on mute.
Still on mute, Glenn.
Sorry about that, about the muting. Yeah, thanks so much for giving a presentation. So you talked about collective intelligence, and I was wondering if you can share perhaps some examples, if you know of, in terms of working with groups or corporations in helping facilitate increasing that collective intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, Sandy Pentland's got abundant information on that. There's a lot of efforts going on, and a lot of them are closed. They're in the companies, so they don't share that data. But even the Google with their was it Project Alphabet, the where they were looking for the deep patterns of like what helps groups perform, and they found it was psychological safety was the number one thing. And like things that we didn't really, we were trying to put together the right personalities and engineer these groups, but really they have it already within them. So I think there's a lot of companies doing that kind of work. I mean, they all are really. Yeah, I would look at Sandy Pentland.
All right, great.
Thanks. Paul, and then we'll stick to time here. So Paul, you'll be the last word, I believe.
You're on mute.
Now you're muted, Paul.
But you're not. There you are.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Sorry about that. Set up for listening. So I just want to respond to the conversation you started to have there with David. First of all, thank you so much for such an amazing presentation. I always get so inspired by your work, and the piece that I think helps me to knit these things together is the world of language. The language was not really featuring so much in your presentation, and it feels to me as though missing the dynamics of language, and particularly the dynamics of the rigidity, how language can become very rigid. For example, how we think about ourselves, how we think about others, the judgments that we make and so forth, and how we can get sort of stuck in a corner. And I mean, in a sense, your work is all about trying to break out of that stuckness of our current institutional models and so forth. But when the piece about pro-social that excites me is not just the core design principles, it's the idea of psychological flexibility, the capacity to step back and witness our languaging and witness our construction, and to break through that rigidity of languaging about things. From my perspective, that is the piece that is needed. Because just to give an example, honeybee democracy, example that you gave, I was thinking about it as you were presenting it. I was thinking, yeah, but humans can do that much more efficiently. We just tell each other where the best spot is, but then we also, with that same language tool, we build power dynamics, which then get in the way of our capacity to act in a distributed fashion. So we don't need to go back to doing waggle dances, but we need to somehow break through the rigidity. And I think that's, from my perspective, one of the key elements is this kind of learning to hold language more lightly, learning to hold language in a way that's more pragmatic. I just wondered if you've got any comments about that.
Oh, I sure do. I mean, I've struggled with it so much. I mean, just like nature, the human nature connection, and inspiration from nature. It's like we are nature, like we're animals, we evolved, there's no difference. And so for me, when I use the word nature, I always use it in terms of human nature or the truly nature, all of us. And so that's been a real conscious effort to use language that way. Because, even like in biomimicry, we're always talking about innovation inspired by nature, but even just saying that reinforces the separation. So, and we're finding that everywhere. And so a lot of it is the language. I think is really key.
Yeah. So I think that, Paul, did you have more to say about that?
Oh, I have a lot more to say about that, but conscious will. I just keep on talking with you. Yep.
Well, no, I mean, I think one of the great things about this kind of interchange is that, there's been a great union. It's like cultural recombination. And so I think that those of us on the call have really received so much. It's been recorded, and so it can be viewed further on. And I would like to think that it'll build a bridge between our communities, and that we will have all sorts of ideas, I think, and then we'll be eager to offer you ideas as well. And whether there's could be a mechanism for that is something that we try to do with many, many different partnerships. And so I think I'd love to think that one outcome of this would be some sort of ongoing a vehicle for continued interchange. And of course, one thing would be to have a workshop at that awesome site of yours. And
yeah,
so
what a good
I think
idea.
that let's do that.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome. I mean, more place-based stuff. We do a lot on online interactions. In fact, it's quite amazing what can be done with online interactions, but there's no substitute, not only for getting together, but also getting together in nature, and food, drink, in nature, music, the arts,
Yes.
all of that. And so
We're
I
actually
just
we're gonna have music festivals and all kinds of salons and all kinds of experiences.
Yeah, well, I think you're really great that you're doing that, and I think that we should make use of that. Find a way to come to you, basically, and then to spend a few days that way would be awesome.
I would love that. Come on down.
Okay.
You guys
All
are
right,
my
friends.
favorite people, like doing the same thing as me. I love it.
Yep, there you go. Okay, friends. So I hope to see some of you next week. And thank you once more. That was great, Tamsin. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you all so very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye.
you,
Thank
Tamsin,
you.
Thank
for
you.
presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tamsin. That was awesome.
Thank you.